Have you ever witnessed a moment so powerful that it changed an entire town? In the quiet, snowy hills of Maple Hollow, a police officer and his loyal German shepherd uncovered a secret that would shatter corruption and rebuild hope from its ruins. But the story doesn't end there, because what happened next would prove that even in the darkest storms, compassion can still light the way. Where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments below. I'd love to know where our story is reaching you. And if you believe that kindness still matters in this world, hit that subscribe button to join our growing family of storytellers. Have a beautiful day, and may your heart stay open, just like the door in our story. The storm came to Maple Hollow like a memory the town wished to forget. Rain slanted across the pine-lined streets, and the wind carried the cold breath of the northern mountains. Streetlights flickered above the puddled road, their reflections trembling in the water like broken glass. It was the kind of day when even hope looked for shelter. Officer Caleb Rourke guided his patrol truck through the winding road that led to Maplewood Academy, the most prestigious private school in the state of Montana. Caleb was 38, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that carried both kindness and exhaustion in equal measure. His dark brown hair was streaked with early gray near the temples, a quiet reminder of too many nights spent in the military K-9 division before he returned home to Maple Hollow. There was an old scar cutting along his jawline, visible only when the lightning flashed. Beneath the layers of uniform and duty, Caleb carried a gentleness that seemed too soft for his profession, the kind that showed when he spoke to children or animals. Beside him sat Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with golden tan fur and a saddle of black across his back. Ranger's right ear had a small tear from an old mission in Afghanistan, and his amber eyes glowed with intelligence that often seemed almost human. He had been Caleb's partner since the war, a dog once trained for detection and rescue, now retired but restless. When he wasn't patrolling with Caleb, he waited by the station door, as if the ghosts of old sirens still called to him. Ranger was disciplined, loyal, but wary of strangers. He trusted Caleb more than the world itself. "Quiet night, huh, partner?" Caleb murmured, rubbing the dog's neck. The rain intensified, hammering the windshield. In the soft glow of the dashboard, Caleb's expression shifted, touched by melancholy. A voicemail played on the radio, Dr. Sarah Bennett's voice. Sarah was 36, slender and tall, her presence both graceful and reserved. She owned the Maple Hollow Veterinary Clinic on Main Street, her chestnut hair, usually tied in a loose bun, framed a face both beautiful and weary, like someone who had spent a lifetime caring for others and forgotten how to rest. Sarah was known in town for her kindness to strays and her quiet firmness with people. Yet beneath her calm voice was the echo of tragedy. 3 years earlier, her younger brother, a firefighter, had died during a rescue Caleb had commanded. Since then, she had built walls around herself, made of composure and professionalism. In her message, she had said simply, "Caleb, I'm leaving for Seattle next week. I can't keep circling this town. I hope you understand." He didn't. But there was no time to think. A sharp static broke through his radio, dispatch calling in. "Unit 12, possible disturbance near Maplewood Academy. Unknown voices, possibly juveniles." Caleb straightened, flicked on his siren, and Ranger rose, alert. Across town, the St. Mary's Home for Children bus had just finished its charity visit to Maplewood. The rain had started suddenly, drumming on the school's white stone facade. The gates, black iron and gold crest, stood tall, proud, and cold. The visitors had left in a rush. The children herded aboard the yellow bus as thunder rolled. But in the confusion, 2 names were never checked: Lila and Emma Whitmore, sisters. Lila was 10, thin as a reed, with dark hair tied back in a ribbon, too big for her small face. Her eyes, gray like early frost, held the look of someone who'd grown up watching the world from corners. Emma, 2 years younger, had golden brown curls that stuck to her cheeks in the rain, and a smile too innocent for the place that had raised her. They had been at St. Mary's for just over a year since their parents died in a highway accident outside Helena. Lila had promised her little sister that they'd never be separated again, and she held that promise like armor. When the bus doors closed, the roar of engines drowned out Emma's voice, calling, "Wait!" The sound faded into the storm. The girls stood under the archway, shivering. The courtyard was empty except for a silver SUV idling near the gate. Inside sat Vivian Hale, the 52-year-old principal of Maplewood Academy. She was immaculate even in the rain. Navy blue coat, pearl earrings, posture straight as a ruler. Years of ambition had carved her into something polished but brittle. Her beauty was sharp and deliberate, every gesture measured to project control. People in town called her Madame Maplewood, half in admiration, half in fear. She believed that discipline was a form of divinity, and that poverty was a result of weak character. When she noticed the two drenched girls standing near the fence, something cruel flickered behind her calm smile. She lowered her window. "Go ahead," she said, her voice cutting through the rain like a whip. "Eat the dirt, you filthy little bastards." Lila froze, clutching Emma's hand. Vivian's driver hesitated. "Ma'am." "Drive!" Vivian snapped. The SUV lurched forward, tires slicing through a puddle. A wave of muddy water splashed over the girls, covering them from head to toe. Vivian didn't look back. The taillights disappeared into the mist, leaving only the smell of exhaust and the faint echo of laughter from the car. Emma burst into tears. Lila didn't. She simply wiped her sister's face with her sleeve, her own lips trembling. "We'll go home," she whispered, though she didn't know where home was anymore. They started walking along the empty road, rain falling heavier now, soaking their shoes until they squished with every step. Caleb's truck turned onto the same street moments later. Through the streaked windshield, he saw two small shapes stumbling along the curb. Ranger barked sharply once, his instinct for distress awakened. Caleb braked hard, swung open the door, and ran toward them. "Hey, are you okay?" His voice was steady but urgent. The older girl froze, shielding her sister behind her. Mud streaked their faces, their clothes clung like rags. Ranger approached slowly, his head low, tail wagging cautiously. The little one, Emma, reached out, fingers trembling. Ranger licked her hand softly, whining. "It's all right," Caleb said, kneeling to their level. "You're safe now. I'm Officer Rourke." Lila stared at the badge on his chest, then at his kind eyes. "We were left," she whispered. He nodded. "Let's get you somewhere warm." He took off his coat, wrapping it around them both. The rain beat down as he guided them to the truck. Inside, Ranger curled up beside the girls, his warmth steadying their shivers. At the Maple Hollow police station, the fluorescent lights hummed softly. Caleb brought the girls into the staff lounge where Sarah was waiting. She had heard his call on the scanner. She knelt beside them, drying Emma's hair with a towel. Her gentle touch contrasted with her composed expression. "Poor things," she murmured. "They're freezing." Caleb handed her a cup of cocoa. "St. Mary's bus left them. The school claims no record." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Maplewood? That place's reputation is built on gold-plated lies." Ranger settled by the heater, eyes half closed but ears still twitching. Every time someone passed near the girls, he lifted his head protectively. Sarah noticed and smiled faintly. "He remembers being a guardian," she said. "He still is," Caleb replied, then quieter. "Always will be." The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Outside, the rain softened into mist, silvering the windows. The girls had fallen asleep, Emma's head resting on Lila's shoulder. Sarah placed a blanket over them and whispered, "You can't fight every cruelty in this town, Caleb." "Maybe not," he said, watching the sleeping children. "But I can start with this one." Their eyes met for the first time in months. In that silence hung the ghosts of everything unsaid, grief, regret, and the fragile beginnings of something like hope. Ranger gave a low rumble in his throat, as if echoing Caleb's resolve. Outside, beyond the dark glass, Maplewood's towering gates gleamed faintly under the streetlights. Somewhere behind them, the truth waited, buried under money, mud, and silence. And Officer Caleb Rourke, a man who had seen too many battles, realized this would be the hardest one yet. Not against bullets, but against indifference. The rain finally stopped. Morning came pale and silver over Maple Hollow, turning the soaked streets into a mirror of melting clouds. The police station was unusually quiet, its windows beaded with dew. Caleb Rourke had spent the night in his office chair, boots still on, the smell of rain clinging to his jacket. Ranger slept beside the heater, paws twitching in a dream. Across the hallway, two small figures were curled together on the couch, wrapped in a blanket that seemed too big for their frail bodies. The world had shrunk for them into that single patch of warmth. Sarah Bennett entered softly, carrying 2 mugs of hot milk. Her long beige coat was damp at the hem from walking through puddles. Her hair, a tumble of chestnut waves, framed her face in the pale light. She looked like someone born to move quietly through places of pain. Gentle hands, soft voice, eyes that had seen too much. She set the mugs down and looked toward Caleb. "They didn't wake all night," she whispered. "Emma cried in her sleep once, but Lila held her hand. She's the strong one." Caleb rubbed his temples. "They shouldn't have been there at all. The academy called them guests. Guests don't end up covered in mud at midnight." Sarah sat across from him. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" He shook his head. "Not when I saw what that woman did. She looked at them like they were insects." There was a brief silence broken only by the sound of Ranger shifting on the floor. The dog opened his amber eyes and watched Sarah pour milk into a small bowl. "He still doesn't like strangers much," she said. "Except you," Caleb murmured. "He always remembers kindness." A knock came at the door. Officer Raymond Carter, Caleb's deputy, stepped in holding a clipboard. Carter was in his late 20s, sturdy, with a clean face and the cautious energy of a man still learning the balance between ambition and fear. "Chief, I called St. Mary's. Their administrator says the bus driver checked everyone. Claims both girls must have wandered off." "Wandered off?" Caleb's tone hardened. "In a thunderstorm?" "Sir," she sounded nervous, Carter added. "Said she'd rather not speak over the phone." Caleb stood, slipping on his jacket. "Then we'll go there ourselves." Sarah rose too. "You'll need someone the girls trust. I'll come." He hesitated. "You don't work for the department." "I work for compassion," she replied simply. "That's close enough." Ranger barked once, as if in agreement. St. Mary's Home for Children sat at the edge of town, a low brick building with whitewashed walls now dulled by years of Montana wind. Ivy crept along the fences, and the small playground out back was littered with broken swings. Inside, the air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old wood polish. The administrator, Mrs. Ellen Harwood, met them in the hall. She was a woman in her late 40s, short and round, with sharp blue eyes and a constant flutter in her hands when she spoke. "Oh, Officer Rourke, I can't tell you how awful this is," she said quickly. "The school called it a misunderstanding, said the girls left early." "They didn't," Caleb said. "They were left behind. And one of your girls has a fever now because of it." Mrs. Harwood wrung her fingers. I know. I'm filing a report, but I have to be careful. Maplewood sponsors part of our grant. If I push too hard," Sarah's voice softened, "then you lose your funding." The woman's eyes filled with helplessness. "I'm just trying to keep food on their plates." Caleb nodded grimly. He'd seen this before. Good people cornered by powerful systems. "We'll handle it from here," he said. Before they left, Emma came running down the hall in borrowed clothes 2 sizes too big, Ranger trotting behind her like a silent guardian. "Officer Caleb, Ranger found the room with toys," she said breathlessly. "He barked until the lady gave them to us." Sarah smiled faintly. "He's a good judge of character." Caleb crouched beside Emma. "Hey, champ, you and your sister feel safe here?" Emma's eyes flicked toward the window. "It's too quiet. The other kids don't talk much." Sarah and Caleb exchanged a look. Silence in a children's home was never a good sign. Later that afternoon, the trio drove back through Maple Hollow. The clouds were thinning, sunlight slipping between them like forgiveness trying to return. Sarah leaned against the window, watching the mountains. "You ever think the whole town looks different after a storm?" Caleb nodded. "Storms show what's still standing." At the station, an email awaited him from an anonymous address. It contained a single attachment, a photo of Maplewood Academy's courtyard. In the background, Vivian Hale's SUV gleamed under the rain, its license plate visible. The subject line read, "She has friends everywhere." Caleb frowned. "Someone's warning us, or threatening us." Sarah peered at the screen. "You think someone inside the school sent it?" "Or someone who wants me to stop digging," Caleb said quietly. Ranger growled low, his instincts responding to the tension. Caleb reached down, scratching his neck. Easy, boy. We're not in a war zone anymore. But part of him knew that wasn't true. The battlefield was just quieter now. That evening, as dusk melted over Maple Hollow, Caleb drove to the academy gates. The rain had washed the mud away, leaving only faint stains on the pavement. Vivian Hale's office lights burned high in the main building, glowing gold against the dark windows. He parked nearby and approached the security booth. Inside sat Tom Greer, an aging guard with thinning hair and the habit of chewing toothpicks. Tom had been a police officer once, years, before Caleb joined the force. "Evening, Chief," he greeted warily. "What brings you here?" "Looking into a report from yesterday. 2 children left behind." Tom's toothpick paused. "I heard about that. Real shame. But you know how things work here. No one talks unless the principal says so." "Does she often tell people not to talk?" Caleb asked. Tom shrugged. "Depends who's asking." Before Caleb could respond, Vivian herself appeared at the top of the steps, her umbrella perfectly aligned with her posture. "Officer Rourke," she called out, her tone gracious but cold. "I didn't expect law enforcement to visit my campus twice in one day." He walked closer. "I wanted to confirm your statement about the girls." She smiled faintly. "Children often exaggerate. Perhaps they lingered behind for attention." Caleb's jaw tightened. They nearly froze in the rain. Vivian tilted her head, eyes narrowing slightly. "Then, perhaps they've learned an important lesson about responsibility." Her words were smooth as silk, poisonous underneath. Caleb didn't answer. He turned away, but not before noticing the school's motto carved above the doorway: "Where every child finds opportunity." The irony made his stomach knot. At home that night, Caleb couldn't sleep. Ranger paced the floor restlessly. The rain had stopped, but the house felt colder than before. On his desk lay the photo from the anonymous email. He enlarged it until the faint reflection in the SUV window became visible, a blurred silhouette of Vivian's face. He printed the image, circled it with a red pen, and pinned it to his corkboard beside a new heading: Maplewood Case. Ranger jumped onto the couch, head resting on his paws, watching as Caleb began typing his report. Halfway through, his phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Emma's fever's gone down. Lila keeps asking if you'll visit tomorrow. She said you make her feel safe." Caleb stared at the message for a long time before replying, "Tell her we'll find the truth." Both of them deserve that. Outside, the moon emerged from the thinning clouds, pale and clean. In the quiet of the room, the line between duty and compassion blurred until they became the same thing. The following morning dawned brittle and cold, the air sharp enough to sting the lungs. A thin veil of frost glazed the streets of Maple Hollow, and the pale light of early sun struggled to pierce the fog rising from the river. From his office window, Officer Caleb Rourke watched the horizon, while Ranger paced restlessly beside his desk. The dog's claws clicked softly against the wooden floor, an anxious rhythm that matched Caleb's thoughts. Since the confrontation with Vivian Hale the previous night, something inside him had begun to hum with quiet defiance. He could feel the shape of the truth pressing against the edges of Maplewood Academy like a heartbeat beneath stone. Sarah Bennett arrived just after sunrise, her breath clouding in the cold air. She wore a simple gray sweater under her parka, a stethoscope still hanging around her neck, a reminder that she'd been at her clinic through most of the night treating a wounded stray. There were faint shadows under her eyes, but she still moved with that unhurried grace of someone who had learned to live through loss. When she entered Caleb's office, Ranger's tail thumped twice in greeting. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, studying him. He smiled faintly. "You'd win that contest." Sarah placed a thermos of coffee on his desk. "Then call it a tie." She hesitated before adding, "Emma's fever's gone, but Lila hasn't spoken much. She keeps asking if people who lie ever get punished." Caleb leaned back in his chair. Maybe she already knows the answer. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that carries both understanding and sorrow. Then a knock came at the door. Deputy Raymond Carter stepped in again, clutching a folder thick with printed emails. His uniform was neat, but his expression uneasy. "Chief, I think you need to see this. I got it from an old friend who used to work at Maplewood's admin office." The top page was a donor roster, names of local corporations, private benefactors, and one familiar signature at the bottom. Vivian Hale, Education Development Grant recipient. Caleb frowned. These companies, most of them are construction firms, not educational sponsors. Raymond nodded. They've been sending money to Maplewood for years, supposedly for community development, but St. Mary's hasn't seen a dime. Sarah leaned over the papers. So the school takes donations in the name of charity and keeps it? Looks like it. Caleb rubbed his jaw. She's laundering her reputation. That afternoon, Caleb decided to pay another visit to the academy. This time, he went without a badge on display, wearing a brown field jacket and a wool cap. Ranger trotted beside him, leash loose but alert. The campus was alive with students again, children in immaculate uniforms, their laughter echoing off marble walls. Everything about the place gleamed with order and money. Yet under it lay something brittle and unnatural. Near the front steps, a boy slipped on the icy pavement, his lunch tray scattering across the ground. No one stopped to help, except a janitor, a wiry man with sunken cheeks and rough hands. He looked up as Caleb approached. His name tag read, Luis Ortega. "You all right there, son?" Caleb asked the boy, who nodded quickly and ran off. Luis gave a small smile. "Kids here don't get their shoes dirty often," he said in a low voice, his accent hinting at years spent between languages. "They learn quick who's worth helping." Caleb crouched slightly, pretending to pick up a fallen carton. "You work here long?" 8 years, long enough to know when not to speak." Ranger sniffed the man's boot, tail flicking once. Luis chuckled. "Smart dog. He smells trouble." Caleb met his gaze. "You've seen things, haven't you?" The janitor hesitated, then sighed. "Last year they told me to clear out the storage basement under the west wing, said it was for renovation. But when I went down, there were stacks of boxes, files, old computers, even student records, all marked for disposal. 2 days later, they were gone." Caleb's voice dropped. "Gone where?" Luis glanced toward the main building. "Ask the principal. She knows what ghosts she buries." That night, Caleb returned home with Ranger, his mind spinning. He spent hours cross-referencing donation records with local permits. Every community outreach grant Maplewood received matched a sudden withdrawal from the town's education fund. Vivian Hale hadn't just manipulated data, she'd stolen public money through private donors. When exhaustion finally won, Caleb fell asleep at his desk. He dreamed of rain again, of Lila's small hand gripping Emma's, of Vivian's car speeding away, of Ranger barking into the void. When he woke, dawn had returned, and Sarah was standing in the doorway holding 2 coffees. "You should start locking your door," she teased gently. "I tried. Ranger opens it." She smiled faintly, setting down the cups. "Lila drew something this morning." She handed him a piece of paper, crayon smeared across its surface. It showed 2 girls, a man in a uniform and a dog beneath a gray cloud. At the bottom, in shaky letters, "Safe now." Caleb looked at it for a long time. "They trust us," he said quietly. "Then we'd better deserve it," Sarah replied. Later that day, he met Mayor Harold Denton, a stocky man in his 60s with slicked back hair and the easy charm of a lifelong politician. His office smelled of old cigars and ambition. A framed photo of him shaking hands with Vivian Hale hung on the wall. "Caleb," Denton said, smiling too wide, "what brings my favorite officer here?" "I need access to Maplewood's funding reports," Caleb said bluntly. "Something isn't right." The mayor's smile faltered. "Careful now. Vivian's a pillar of this community. Her school attracts attention, investment, money," Caleb cut in. "From where?" Denton's fingers drummed the desk. "You're chasing shadows, son. Leave it alone. The town can't afford another scandal." Caleb stood slowly. "Sometimes a scandal is the only way to clean the rot." As he left, Denton's voice followed him, low and warning. "You're not just poking the school, Rourke. You're poking the people who built it." Outside, the snow had started again, soft flakes swirling in the gray air. Ranger barked at the wind, as if sensing the gathering storm. That evening, Caleb stopped by Sarah's clinic. The small building glowed warmly against the dusk. Inside, the scent of antiseptic and hay mixed with the soft whimpering of animals. Sarah was tending to a limping Labrador when he entered. "He was hit by a car," she said softly. "The owner left him on the road." People can be cruel, Caleb replied, crouching beside her. Not just people, she murmured, binding the bandage. Systems. They make cruelty look like order. He watched her for a moment, her careful movements, her eyes full of empathy that never quite healed her own pain. Why do you stay here, Sarah? This town hasn't been kind to you either. She smiled faintly. Because leaving means surrendering. And I'm not done fighting. Their eyes met, the air between them heavy with something unspoken. Ranger barked once from the doorway, breaking the moment. Caleb exhaled a quiet laugh. Guess that's my cue. Take care of yourself, she said, touching his arm lightly before he left. That night, as Caleb drove home, he saw movement near the academy gates. A black SUV was parked in the shadows, its headlights off. He slowed, watching. 2 men in maintenance uniforms were loading boxes into the back, boxes labeled archives. Ranger growled low. Caleb whispered, "You smell it too, don't you?" He turned off his lights and parked a block away, stepping into the cold. From behind the fence, he watched the men disappear into the night, the SUV rolling away toward the highway. On the wet ground where it had stood, a single paper fluttered loose. Caleb picked it up. It was an official seal from the Education Grant Board, stamped confidential report. Maplewood Academy. He stared at it, realization dawning like a storm breaking through fog. Whatever Vivian Hale was hiding, it wasn't just about children. It was about power. Ranger pressed against his leg, warm and solid. Caleb looked down at his partner and whispered, "Looks like we're not done yet, boy." The wind howled through the iron gates, carrying the scent of rain and something darker. The night had left Maple Hollow slick and silent, the streets glazed with a sheen of melted frost. A thin mist hung over the town, curling between lampposts and the sleeping rooftops. Caleb Rourke stood outside Maplewood Academy's gates at dawn, his breath forming clouds in the cold. The paper he had picked up the night before, the one marked confidential report, was now sealed inside a plastic sleeve in his coat pocket. Ranger stood beside him, nose low to the ground, sniffing the damp asphalt. His tail was stiff, his body alert. Something about this place unsettled him. A crimson stain caught Caleb's eye near the curb. At first glance it looked like rust, but when he crouched down, he saw it for what it was, mud mixed with oil and tire tracks. The mark curved into the gutter where the rain had carried it, forming a dark crescent. He pressed his fingers lightly to it. It wasn't fresh, but not old either, the exact spot where the SUV had spun its wheels the day Vivian Hale had humiliated those children. A physical echo of cruelty. He took out his phone and snapped photos from several angles. Ranger moved a few steps ahead, nose twitching, then barked once, sharp and decisive. Caleb followed the dog's lead to a drain pipe where something glinted faintly. He reached down and pulled out a small metal pendant shaped like a dove. It had a name etched on the back, St. Mary's Home. His chest tightened. "They must have dropped this when they ran," he murmured. Ranger gave a low whine, tail wagging softly. The sound of footsteps behind him made him straighten. "Officer Rourke," came the cool voice of Vivian Hale. She was immaculate, as always, dressed in a pale gray coat and leather gloves, her silver hair swept into a perfect knot. Even in the weak morning light, she looked untouchable. "I didn't expect to find you here at this hour. Policing puddles now?" Caleb pocketed the pendant. "I'm documenting a site connected to a case." "Case?" she repeated, amusement curling in her tone. "Surely you don't think my school is under investigation. You have better things to do." He met her gaze. "Maybe I don't." Her smile faltered. "Officer, I've given my life to this academy. Don't mistake discipline for cruelty. Those girls needed a lesson in manners." Caleb's voice hardened. No child needs to be humiliated to learn. For a moment, the polished surface of her composure cracked. Something colder flickered behind her eyes. "Be careful what battles you choose. This town owes me more than you realize." Then, as if a switch flipped, she smiled again. "Have a pleasant morning, officer." She turned and walked back toward her car. Ranger growled softly, ears pinned. Caleb placed a calming hand on his head. "Easy, boy. She's not worth it. Yet." By noon, Caleb sat in the small diner across from the courthouse, poring over the confidential report. Most of it was technical, financial statements, inspection records, but one section caught his eye: authorized modifications, basement level, west wing. There were approval stamps from the Education Grant Board and Maple Hollow City Council, signed by Mayor Denton himself. Yet no such basement appeared on the school's architectural plans. The waitress, Marlene, a red-haired woman in her 50s with a raspy smoker's laugh, refilled his coffee. "You look like a man reading his own obituary," she said. "Feels about right," Caleb muttered. Marlene leaned closer. "You poking around Maplewood? You're not the first. Last year a journalist came sniffing too. Said the place smelled of secrets. Then she left town fast. Said she got threatened." "What was her name?" "Olivia Pierce. Writes for the Montana Chronicle. Real smart lady. Too curious for her own good." Caleb made a note. "Thanks, Marlene. If anyone asks, you didn't see me." She winked. "Honey, I never see anything I can't afford to remember." Back at the station, Sarah was waiting. She had brought Lila and Emma for a follow-up checkup with the department counselor, but her face showed she hadn't come only for that. "We need to talk," she said quietly. "Something's wrong at St. Mary's." Caleb frowned. "What do you mean?" "They just got an email from the Sunshine Fund. They're suspending all support, food, uniforms, even heating subsidies. The message said the organization's reviewing St. Mary's for negligent supervision. That's Vivian's doing. She's shifting blame." He exhaled slowly. "She's cutting their lifeline." Sarah nodded. "Those children will freeze this winter. We can't let her bury this." Ranger came up to her, nudging her hand. She smiled faintly, scratching behind his ear. "Even he knows it." Caleb stared at the pendant on his desk, the dove from the drainpipe, and felt something in him settle like stone. Then we hit back, legally. That evening, he contacted Ethan Marsh, a lawyer in his early 40s known for his stubborn integrity and his messy brown hair that never quite obeyed gravity. Ethan had once served as a prosecutor before moving to Maple Hollow to raise his daughter after losing his wife to cancer. Years of grief had carved empathy into his voice. "You always find trouble, Rourke," Ethan said over the phone, half amused, half weary. "Send me what you have." Caleb forwarded the documents. "This isn't just misconduct, it's fraud. The school's hiding financial data and maybe destroying records." Ethan's voice turned grave. "Then we'll need evidence admissible in court. If we can prove those files are being erased, she's finished. I've already seen boxes marked archives being moved out at night." "Then, let's make sure we know where they're going," Ethan replied. "I'll file for a preservation order tomorrow, but it'll take time." Caleb smiled thinly. "Time's one thing she's running out of." Later, as snow began to fall over the quiet town, Caleb drove to Sarah's clinic. The lights inside cast a soft amber glow through the windows. She was cleaning up after closing, sleeves rolled, hair loose over her shoulders. The sight of her in that gentle light made the air feel warmer. He handed her the pendant. "Found this at the academy." She turned it over, reading the engraving. "St. Mary's home. That's Emma's necklace. She used to wear it every day." "Then she was right there when it happened," Caleb said. "And Vivian knew it?" Sarah's jaw tightened. "She won't stop until she destroys everyone who threatens her image." "She picked the wrong enemies." For a moment, they stood in silence. Then Sarah said softly, "You can't fight her alone." "I'm not," he said, glancing down at Ranger, who thumped his tail. "I've got partners." She smiled faintly. "You always did believe in loyalty. Dog first, woman second." "Dog's never broken my heart," he teased. Her laughter came like a fragile melody, breaking through the heaviness that had settled between them. The next morning, Caleb and Ranger drove back to the academy's west wing. He parked a block away and waited until sunrise to approach. The door marked "Maintenance" was unlocked. Inside, the corridor smelled of fresh paint, too fresh. He followed the scent until it led him to a sealed stairwell. The plaster was new, but the floor around it was scuffed, as if heavy crates had been dragged recently. He crouched to examine the baseboard, running his fingers along the wall. There, beneath a thin layer of paint, metal. A latch. He pried it open just enough to see darkness below and the faint smell of mold and old paper. Ranger let out a low growl, ears forward. Yeah, Caleb whispered. She buried something down there. A sound behind him, a click. He froze, the metallic slide of a gun being cocked. Step away from the wall, officer, came a low voice. He turned slowly to find Security Chief Martin Crow, a burly man in his 50s with a face like a weathered brick and a limp that spoke of old violence. His uniform bore the Maplewood crest, and his eyes, small and dark, held no warmth. "Morning, Crow," Caleb said evenly. "New renovation plans?" "Private property," Crow replied. "You shouldn't be here. Neither should whatever's down there." Crow's lips curved in something like a sneer. "Some doors are sealed for a reason, Rourke. You open them, things fall apart." Caleb stepped back slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Then, you'd better hope the right person doesn't find the key." Crow gestured with the gun toward the exit. "Leave, and don't come back." Ranger's growl deepened, a low rumble vibrating through the hall. Caleb raised his hand slightly. "All right, boy, not today." He walked out slowly, the dog following close, every muscle ready to spring. Once outside, he glanced back at the building. The morning light was rising over the academy's white walls, making them gleam like marble. But beneath that gleam, he now knew, the foundation was cracking. The first snow of the season arrived that night, blanketing Maple Hollow in white so pure it seemed almost dishonest. By dawn, the town lay silent beneath a thin, glittering crust of frost, the air sharp and still. Officer Caleb Rourke stood in front of his mirror, buttoning his winter jacket with movements that were slower than usual. Beneath his calm, there was tension, a quiet, simmering anger he'd been carrying since his confrontation with the academy's security chief. Ranger sat nearby, tail curled around his paws, eyes tracking every motion. The dog's fur had grown thicker with the cold, and a faint scar on his left flank caught the light when he shifted. He was restless, pacing occasionally to the window, ears twitching toward the distant hum of a world that seemed unaware of what was festering within it. Caleb clipped his badge to his chest, grabbed his folder, and stepped into the morning air. Ranger followed, leaving twin prints in the snow. At the precinct, Deputy Raymond Carter was already waiting, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, and worry etched into his face. His normally neat hair was a mess, his uniform wrinkled, signs of a sleepless night. "Chief," he said quietly, handing Caleb the mug, "you might want to see this." He laid a brown envelope on the desk. Inside were printed screenshots from a community board, the town's online forum. The posts were spreading fast. Police harassment at Maplewood, Officer Rourke accused of trespassing, town hero or troublemaker. Beneath the headlines were comments, some supportive, but many filled with venom. Caleb frowned. "Who started it?" "Anonymous profile," Carter replied. But the first post went up at 2 a.m., same IP address as the Academy's administrative office. "So she's going public," Caleb said, his voice tight. "She wants to turn this into a scandal before we can expose her." Carter nodded. "She's smart, Chief. The mayor's already called twice. They're asking for your statement." Caleb exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of the desk. "I'll give them one, but not the one they're expecting." Ranger gave a low bark, as if seconding the sentiment. Later that morning, Caleb met Ethan Marsh, the lawyer, in a small office above the town bakery, a place that smelled faintly of cinnamon and burnt coffee. Ethan looked tired but focused, his tie slightly loosened, sleeves rolled up. "She's going for character assassination," Ethan said, tapping the laptop screen. "If this keeps spreading, the department might suspend you pending review." Caleb sat down, rubbing his temples. "She's one step ahead every time." Ethan leaned back in his chair. "That's what happens when the corrupt have money and friends in the right places. But we have something she doesn't: conscience and evidence." Caleb smiled faintly. "Conscience doesn't trend online." Ethan's expression softened. "No, but truth has a longer lifespan." Ranger, lying at Caleb's feet, shifted and lifted his head suddenly. His ears twitched. Moments later, there was a knock on the door. When Ethan opened it, Sarah Bennett stepped inside, her cheeks flushed from the cold, hair dusted with snowflakes. She carried a small envelope in her gloved hand. "I got this in the mail this morning," she said, handing it to Caleb. Inside was a printed photo, grainy but unmistakable. It showed Caleb kneeling beside the broken wall in Maplewood's west wing. The caption scrawled beneath read, "Officer caught breaking into restricted property." "She's escalating," Sarah said softly. "Someone's following you." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Then we're closer than I thought." Ethan looked at them both. "We'll counter it. I'll issue a statement claiming the investigation is part of a departmental review into education safety. It'll buy us time." Caleb nodded. "Make it sound official. Meanwhile, I'll find where those files went." Sarah hesitated. "You're not planning to go back there, are you? Not alone?" Caleb looked at her with a tired smile. "You know me too well to ask that." She frowned, stepping closer. "Caleb, this isn't the Army. You can't just charge into every fight thinking you'll make it out." "I'm not charging in," he said quietly. "I'm following the trail." Ranger stood, nudging his hand, as if reminding him that he wasn't alone. That evening, the storm deepened. The town's streets emptied as snow fell heavier, muffling every sound except the crunch of boots and the low growl of wind through the pines. Caleb drove toward the outskirts, where the old industrial district began. The tip had come from Luis, the janitor. 3 simple words whispered that morning outside the cafe. "Try the storage depot." The depot sat at the edge of town, half abandoned, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust. A single light burned above the loading bay. Caleb parked a distance away, shutting off his headlights. Ranger jumped out, nose to the air. Together they moved through the snow, keeping low. Inside, muffled voices echoed. He peered through a gap in the wall. 2 men were unloading boxes, marked Archives, Maplewood Academy. One of them was Trent Maddox, a local contractor known for doing quiet work. A tall man with a thick beard and tattooed hands, Trent had the cold efficiency of someone who'd seen too much and cared too little. His partner was younger, nervous, glancing around constantly. Caleb whispered, "She's having the records moved off-site." Ranger gave a short, low growl. Caleb nodded. "Stay." He slipped closer, stepping through a side door left ajar. The smell of dust and diesel filled his lungs. The boxes were stacked neatly, each stamped with old government seals. He snapped several photos with his phone, then froze as footsteps approached. Trent appeared in the doorway, flashlight cutting through the dark. "Who's there?" Caleb stayed still, his pulse steady. When Trent turned away, Caleb moved fast, pressing himself against the wall. But as he stepped backward, a plank creaked underfoot. The sound sliced through the silence. Trent swung around. "Police!" Caleb shouted, stepping into view. "Hands up!" Trent froze, then smirked. "You shouldn't be here, officer." Before Caleb could respond, a sudden movement, a metallic click. The younger man had pulled a knife, his hand shaking. "He's got pictures," he hissed. "Vivian said no witnesses." Ranger burst through the doorway, knocking the knife from the man's hand and pinning him to the floor with a snarl that echoed through the depot. Trent swung a crowbar, catching Caleb's arm. Pain flared, but Caleb punched back, sending the man stumbling. The fight was brief, brutal, ending when Ranger lunged again, growling until both men were face down in the snow outside. Caleb cuffed them with his spare restraints and called for backup. When the patrol cars arrived, their lights painted the night red and blue. Carter climbed out of one, eyes wide. "Chief, what the hell happened?" "Found our missing archives," Caleb said, clutching his arm, "and 2 men paid to erase them." "Erase them how?" Caleb looked at the stack of boxes now loaded into police trucks. "By fire. They were prepping a burn pit out back." Carter shook his head. "Jesus!" Sarah's car appeared moments later. She'd heard the radio call. She ran toward him, coat flapping in the wind. "Caleb, are you—" Her voice cut off when she saw his arm. "You're bleeding?" "It's fine," he said, wincing slightly. Ranger did most of the work. Ranger sat proudly by the patrol car, chest heaving, his muzzle dusted with snow. Sarah knelt, hugging the dog. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. Caleb smiled faintly. "He's getting a medal after this." Ethan arrived soon after, coat thrown hastily over his suit. "You just made my case airtight," he said, scanning the boxes. "We'll subpoena every one of these records. If there's fraud in here, she's finished." Caleb looked toward the academy's distant silhouette on the horizon. Then tomorrow, we make it public. That night, as he sat in his truck outside his house, snow still falling softly around them, Caleb stared at the faint reflection of himself in the windshield. Ranger rested his head on his lap, eyes half closed. The town was asleep, but for the first time in weeks, Caleb felt something break through the exhaustion. Resolve. He turned off the engine and whispered, "Tomorrow, we bring down the wall." Snow still covered Maple Hollow like a veil of silence, but beneath that stillness, the town was buzzing. The arrest at the storage depot had made its way through whispers. People talked about boxes full of secrets, a scandal under the polished crest of Maplewood Academy. By morning, the mayor's office was flooded with calls, reporters began circling the town, and for the first time, the once untouchable Vivian Hale looked uncertain. Caleb Rourke sat in the police conference room, his arm bandaged from the fight the night before. He hadn't slept, but there was a steady fire in his chest, a calm certainty that he was close. Ranger sat beside him, head resting on his paws, ears twitching with every sound in the hall. Across the table, Ethan Marsh flipped through the inventory list of recovered documents. "This is everything," he said. "Financial records, donor lists, internal correspondence. Enough to expose half the lies she's built her career on." Caleb nodded. "Then we take it to the state board today." Sarah Bennett entered the room, carrying a folder. She looked composed, though her face was pale from lack of sleep. "Lila and Emma are safe," she said softly. "Mrs. Harwood's shelter received emergency funding from another organization after the news broke. They're not shutting down." "That's something," Caleb murmured, relief flickering in his eyes. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder briefly, a quiet gesture of grounding. "Be careful in that hearing. Vivian won't go down easy." "She'll have to face it," he replied. "Every word, every number, every child she left behind." Ethan gathered the files and closed his briefcase. "Let's go make it official." The Montana State Education Committee hearing was held in Helena inside a grand stone building whose marble floors echoed with every step. Reporters lined the entrance, their breath misting in the cold air as cameras flashed. Headlines had already spread. Maplewood scandal shakes the state, and principal under fire for misuse of funds. Vivian Hale arrived first, dressed in a pale beige suit that looked expensive but ill-fitting under the harsh winter light. Her silver hair gleamed, and her expression was carefully sculpted, calm, gracious, almost pitying. At her side walked attorney Leonard Voss, a thin man in his 50s with sharp glasses and an even sharper tongue. He was known for representing the powerful, the kind of lawyer who could turn guilt into grace with enough words. When Caleb, Sarah, and Ethan entered, Vivian's eyes flicked toward them. For a moment, something passed between them, a look neither of anger nor fear, but recognition of inevitability. The committee room filled quickly. Wooden benches creaked as local officials, parents, and reporters squeezed in. At the center, under the seal of the state, sat Chairwoman Elaine Porter, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and an unwavering voice. She had spent her life in education reform and carried herself with a calm that demanded respect. "Today," she began, "we review the allegations of financial misconduct, discrimination, and neglect at Maplewood Academy." Her gaze swept the room. "Let the record show that both parties are present." Vivian stood, voice smooth. "Madam Chairwoman, I have dedicated 25 years to the pursuit of academic excellence. Any discrepancies in our funding records were administrative, errors from third-party contractors. I reject the idea that Maplewood ever discriminated against anyone." Ethan rose in response. "With respect, Madam Chairwoman, we have proof otherwise. Submitted into evidence, internal emails, falsified reports, and the recovered files from the Maplewood storage facility." He placed a folder before the board. "These documents show intentional manipulation of student data to maintain elite status and secure donor funding while excluding underprivileged children." Caleb stepped forward then, voice steady. "I was there the day 2 of those children were left outside her school in the rain. One of them nearly froze. Mrs. Hale saw them. She rolled down her window and told them to eat dirt. I picked them up off the ground myself." A ripple of murmurs filled the room. Cameras clicked. Vivian's lawyer immediately objected. Hearsay. Emotional theatrics have no place here. But Chairwoman Porter raised a hand. Overruled. Officer Rourke is testifying to direct observation. Vivian's composure cracked slightly. A faint tremor touched her lips. Ethan opened another file. We also have correspondence between Ms. Hale and Mayor Harold Denton, indicating misallocation of education grants. Funds meant for St. Mary's Shelter and community outreach were rerouted through Maplewood's private account. He read aloud. Maintain image metrics. Limit underprivileged enrollment to below 3%. That is Ms. Hale's signature. The crowd erupted in gasps. Even the reporters paused mid-note. Vivian's attorney whispered something urgent to her, but she stood abruptly, voice raised. You don't understand what it means to build something respected. I gave those children structure. Without discipline, there's chaos. Caleb met her gaze evenly. Without compassion, there's no humanity. Chairwoman Porter's gavel struck once. Order! She turned to Vivian. Ms. Hale, do you deny authorizing the exclusion of lower-income applicants? Vivian's hands trembled slightly on the podium. There were guidelines, standards for behavior. We wanted students who could represent the academy well. Children from poor homes, the chairwoman said evenly, were not capable of representing your academy. Vivian said nothing. Ethan quietly placed the final folder on the table. Madam, Chairwoman, inside you'll find the unaltered video from the academy's security footage, the one recovered from the backup drive. The screen behind them flickered to life. It showed the rainy day months earlier, the two girls by the gate, Vivian's SUV, her hand motioning dismissively, the splash of mud. The room fell silent except for the sound of rain echoing from the speakers. When the video ended, Vivian's shoulders slumped, her hands gripping the table. Chairwoman Porter's voice was calm but firm. The committee will deliberate privately for 10 minutes. Outside the chamber, Caleb stood in the hallway, leaning against the wall. Sarah joined him, arms crossed tightly as if to hold in the tension. You did the right thing, she said softly. Doesn't feel like victory, he murmured. Feels like the beginning of something uglier. She looked up at him. Truth always feels ugly before it heals. Ranger sat between them, head on his paws, eyes half closed. The hallway smelled faintly of wood polish and snow. Across the corridor, Vivian sat alone, her lawyer pacing beside her. For the first time, she looked smaller, not defeated, but human. Caleb wondered fleetingly if she'd ever believed she was the villain. The doors opened. Chairwoman Porter returned, expression grave but resolved. The committee has reached a decision. Everyone filed back in. Cameras flashed. In light of the evidence presented, we hereby suspend Ms. Vivian Hale's position as principal of Maplewood Academy, pending full criminal investigation. She is barred from all educational administrative roles within the state until further notice. Vivian sank back into her seat. A low murmur swept the room, shock, whispers, even applause from some corners. Caleb exhaled quietly, relief washing over him, not as triumph, but as calm. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. Ethan turned to him. You just took down the most powerful woman in the county. Caleb shook his head. No, the truth did. Sarah smiled faintly, brushing snow from Ranger's fur. And maybe a little help from this guy. Ranger barked once, tail thumping, as if to punctuate the moment. That evening, the news broke across every local station. Principal suspended amid education fraud probe. Images of Vivian leaving the courthouse, face pale and drawn, flashed beside a photo of Caleb and Ranger. Across town, at St. Mary's, children huddled around the TV, cheering when they saw the man and his dog on screen. Lila whispered to Emma. He kept his promise. In the quiet of his home, Caleb sat by the fireplace, Ranger asleep beside him. The flames flickered against the walls, and for the first time in months, the air didn't feel heavy. Outside, the world was still frozen, but inside, something had begun to thaw. The winter that followed the hearing was the harshest Maple Hollow had seen in years. Snow piled along the roadsides until the mailboxes disappeared, and the river froze solid enough that children skated across it on weekends. Yet, under that long, white silence, something new began to take root. Maplewood Academy, once the symbol of untouchable privilege, was now closed, its gates chained, its crest covered by tarps. For months it stood like a ghost of arrogance, until one morning the sound of hammers broke the quiet. Caleb Rourke stood outside the school's front lawn, hands deep in his coat pockets, watching volunteers rebuild the front sign. It no longer bore the old motto, "Where every child finds opportunity." Instead, painted in simple blue letters, it now read, "The Open Door Academy." The words were chosen by the very children the old school had rejected. Sarah Bennett walked beside him, bundled in a gray parka and thick scarf, her breath turning to mist. She looked tired, but radiant. The kind of tired that comes from purpose. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" she said softly. "Watching something so broken become something good." Caleb nodded. Strange and right. He looked down at Ranger, who was busy nosing through the snowdrifts, his fur dusted white. The old German Shepherd had become the Academy's unofficial mascot since the hearing, loved by every child who crossed the courtyard. He carried himself with the calm dignity of an old soldier, finally at peace, though his eyes still followed Caleb wherever he went, as if guarding him even now. The building's transformation had been fast. Donations had poured in after the trial, mostly anonymous, some from ordinary townsfolk who'd once been silent, a few from ex-students who had felt complicit in the old system. Ethan Marsh had spearheaded the legal paperwork, insisting the property be transferred to a public trust. Sarah, with her steady compassion and quiet leadership, was appointed to the school's advisory board. Caleb refused any title. "I'll stick to what I know," he'd said, keeping the peace. As workers installed new window panes, Mayor Harold Denton approached from across the street. His heavy coat strained over his belly, and the ever-present cigar smoke trailed behind him. The man had aged 10 years since Vivian Hale's downfall. His once slick hair was now peppered gray, and his confidence had given way to unease. "Morning, Rourke," he said, forcing a smile. Caleb's expression was polite but cool. "Mayor, place looks different." "That's the idea." Denton shuffled awkwardly. "Look, I never wanted it to go that far. Vivian was your ally," Caleb interrupted. "You signed the permits, the donations, the fake reports. You knew what she was doing." The mayor's eyes darted away. "I didn't know everything. Knowing a little and doing nothing isn't much different." For a moment, the wind howled between them, sharp as accusation. Finally, Denton sighed. "You're right. Maybe that's why I'm here." He reached into his coat and handed Caleb a small envelope. "Grant approval. City funding for the new academy. It's not much, but it's clean money this time." Caleb hesitated, then took it. "Let's hope it stays that way." As the mayor walked away, Sarah joined him again, watching his retreating figure. "Do you ever wonder if people like him can really change?" Caleb shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe they just learn how to look in the mirror." Inside, classrooms were slowly taking shape. The old marble floors were now covered in warm wood, the heavy portraits replaced with bright murals painted by local artists. In the gym, children laughed as Ranger trotted among them, tail wagging. Lila and Emma were there too, their cheeks pink with cold and excitement. "Officer Caleb," Emma called, waving from the bleachers. "We made Ranger his own desk." Sure enough, in one corner stood a small wooden platform with a brass nameplate, Deputy Ranger. A red blanket was folded neatly on top. Caleb chuckled. "That's perfect. He's going to start demanding a pension." Lila smiled shyly. She had grown taller over the months, her eyes brighter now, that fear no longer lived behind them. "Sarah said you'll come to the opening ceremony tomorrow," she said. "I wouldn't miss it." "Can I read something for everyone?" she asked. "I wrote about what happened." Caleb hesitated, then nodded. "You should. People need to hear your voice." That evening, the town gathered for the unveiling. The storm had cleared, leaving the sky sharp with stars. Strings of golden lights hung across the gates, and a handmade banner fluttered in the wind. "Welcome to the open door." Ethan Marsh stood at the podium, adjusting his tie nervously. "I never thought I'd be back here," he began, smiling. "But I guess we're all rebuilding something. This school, this town, maybe even ourselves. Applause rippled through the crowd. Sarah stood beside him, her hair shining in the light, reading names of donors and teachers. Caleb stayed near the back, preferring to watch rather than speak. He felt more comfortable that way, part guardian, part observer. Ranger sat loyally at his side, ears perked, tail sweeping the snow. Then Lila stepped onto the small wooden stage, holding a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. A door isn't just something that opens. It's something someone has to build first, and hold open long enough for another person to walk through. She glanced toward Caleb and Sarah. For a long time, people told us we didn't belong anywhere, but this place says we do. It says kindness can be louder than cruelty, and truth stronger than lies. Silence followed, then applause, soft at first, then rising into cheers. Caleb looked down, blinking away the sting behind his eyes. Ranger barked once, as if adding his approval. After the ceremony, Sarah approached him, hands stuffed into her coat pockets. "You're proud," she teased gently. "Maybe a little," he smiled. "They built something better than we ever could." She looked at him for a long moment. "You know, you could stay. They're looking for someone to teach ethics and law. The kids would listen to you." "I'm no teacher," he said. "Maybe not by degree," she replied, "but definitely by example." Before he could answer, a voice called from behind. Vivian Hale's sister, Margaret, had arrived quietly, standing near the gate. Margaret was in her late 50s, smaller than Vivian, with kind brown eyes and a weary grace. Her clothes were simple, her demeanor humble. "I'm sorry for intruding," she said softly. "I just wanted to see what you built here. My sister. She's at peace now, finally. She asked me to tell you that." Caleb nodded slowly. "Thank you for coming." "She wanted this place to exist, you know," Margaret said, glancing at the school. "Not the way she went about it, but she used to dream of helping children, before ambition got in the way." Sarah placed a gentle hand on the woman's shoulder. Then maybe, in a strange way, she did help. Through what not to become. Margaret smiled faintly, tears in her eyes. "I hope so." She turned to leave, but paused. "Thank you for forgiving her, even if you never said it out loud." As she disappeared into the snowy night, Caleb exhaled, his breath forming white clouds that drifted upward. "Maybe that's what this place really is," he said quietly. "A second chance for everyone." Ranger pressed his nose against his hand, a silent agreement. Later, when the lights dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Caleb stood alone before the gates of the new academy. Snowflakes fell softly, melting against his jacket. From inside came the muffled laughter of children. Warm, alive, free. He looked up at the sign one last time. The Open Door Academy. He whispered, "Keep it open, no matter what." Ranger leaned against his leg, and together they walked down the quiet street, the crunch of their steps fading into the gentle hum of a town reborn. Spring came early to Maple Hollow that year. The heavy snow melted into rushing brooks that cut through the hills, and the town, once weary with secrets, began to breathe again. Outside the Open Door Academy, daffodils swayed in the wind, while children chased each other through puddles, their laughter filling the air like music. Officer Caleb Rourke stood near the front steps, his hands in his jacket pockets, watching life return to the place that had nearly been lost. Ranger lay by his feet, older now, his muzzle flecked with gray, his gait slower but still proud. Every child who passed stopped to pet him, whispering secrets into his fur as if he were a keeper of wishes. He accepted it all with calm dignity, his deep amber eyes carrying the patience of a soul who had seen too much and forgiven it all. Inside the building, Sarah Bennett was meeting with the new teaching staff. The morning sunlight spilled through the tall windows, catching the soft gold in her hair as she leaned over lesson plans. Her steady voice filled the room, not commanding, but clear. She had grown into a leader without realizing it, the kind whose warmth inspired rather than demanded. Years ago, her empathy had cost her trust in the system. Now, it rebuilt one. Among the new teachers was Mr. Douglas Hale, a man in his early 60s with thinning hair, spectacles perched low on his nose, and a quiet gentleness that made even restless children sit still. He was Vivian Hale's cousin, a retired literature professor who'd returned to the small town after decades in Chicago. When Sarah had first interviewed him, he'd spoken simply, "I can't fix what she did, but maybe I can help balance the scale." That humility earned him the job. Now he sat at his desk arranging paperbacks of To Kill a Mockingbird, smiling faintly as he watched the students draw on the chalkboard. There was something redemptive in the way he taught, with the soft cadence of a man who understood both beauty and regret. Later that afternoon, Ethan Marsh arrived from Helena, his old truck creaking to a stop near the gate. He stepped out, his dark wool coat dusted with road salt, and greeted Caleb with his usual wry grin. "You look different when you're not testifying under oath," he teased. Caleb chuckled. "You look older every time you drive down here." "Law's a slow poison," Ethan replied, stretching his back. "But it's worth it. The investigation's officially closed, Vivian's file sealed, her sentence commuted to probation and community service. Guess where she's working?" Caleb frowned. "Don't tell me. Some consultancy firm?" Ethan shook his head. "A library in Savannah, cataloging children's books." For a moment, neither spoke. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Ranger barked once, breaking the silence. Ethan smiled down at the dog. "Still the best partner in this whole town. He's earned." "Retirement?" Caleb said softly. But he'd never take it. Ethan leaned against the rail, looking toward the courtyard. "You could use some of that stubbornness yourself. The foundation board's got an empty seat, and Sarah wants you on it." "I'm not built for meetings," Caleb said. "I do better in the field." "Then think of it as a bigger field," Ethan countered. "You fought to open the door. Now someone's got to keep it open." Caleb didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the playground where Lila and Emma were helping repaint benches, their laughter mixing with the distant bell of the old church. "Maybe," he murmured, "maybe it's time to stop fighting ghosts and start guarding something alive." That evening, the academy hosted its first community night. Families gathered in the gym, mothers, fathers, grandparents, and neighbors bringing dishes and music. The air smelled of roasted corn, cinnamon pie, and snow-wet wool. Paper lanterns hung from the ceiling, their glow flickering like fireflies. Sarah moved through the crowd with an ease that belied the exhaustion in her eyes, greeting everyone by name. She stopped near the refreshment table where Martha Cooper, the town's oldest librarian, stood with her cane. Martha was a small, bird-like woman in her 70s, with eyes sharp enough to spot a lie a mile away. She had known Caleb since he was a rookie. "I hear you're becoming a politician now," she said dryly, sipping hot cocoa. Caleb laughed. "You mean the board? Hardly politics." "Everything's politics, son," she said with a wry smile. "But some politics do good. You keep that dog around, people will trust you more than the mayor." Ranger wagged his tail, accepting the compliment as fact. Across the room, Ethan raised a toast, his voice carrying over the chatter. "To the ones who stayed, to the ones who rebuilt, and to the ones we lost, but learned from." The crowd lifted their cups, and for a moment, the noise quieted into something sacred. Lila and Emma performed a short song they had written, about hope, about finding light in rain. The melody was simple but full of innocence, and when they finished, even Martha dabbed at her eyes. As the night wound down, Caleb stepped outside for air. The town glowed in the soft halo of streetlights, and the air smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. Snowmelt trickled through the gutters, whispering of spring. Sarah followed him out, wrapping her coat tighter. "You disappeared again," she said, smiling. "Just needed a minute." She leaned on the railing beside him. "You ever think about what's next?" "I used to think I'd leave," he admitted. "Transfer somewhere quiet, far from all this. But now, I don't know. Maybe this is quiet enough." She studied him for a moment. "You're changing, Caleb Rourke." "Getting old, you mean?" "No," she said softly. "You're finally at peace." They stood there in silence, the stars glimmering faintly above. Ranger came to stand between them, tail brushing against Sarah's boots. She laughed, reaching down to scratch behind his ears. From the road came the sound of a car approaching, an old pickup, headlights dim. A man stepped out carrying a crate of books. He was young, maybe 25, tall and thin, with a nervous energy that made him shift from foot to foot. "Excuse me," he said. "I'm looking for Miss Bennett. I brought the donations from the Veterans Literacy Drive." Sarah smiled and waved him over. "You found her. Thank you for coming." The young man, Tom Weaver, a former Marine, had been one of Caleb's recruits years ago. His left hand trembled slightly from an old injury, but his eyes were earnest. "Heard what you're doing here," he said to Caleb. "Figured maybe I could volunteer, teach reading classes to the older kids." Caleb grinned. "We could use another soldier around." Tom laughed, relief washing over him. "Feels good to build something again." As he carried the crate inside, Sarah turned to Caleb. "See, it's already working." He nodded slowly. One open door at a time. Later that night, the lights of the academy dimmed. The courtyard was empty except for Ranger, who sat by the gate as if standing watch. Caleb lingered nearby, looking up at the school's new banner fluttering in the wind. The wind carried faint echoes, children's laughter, the rhythm of music, the hum of a town finally healed. He felt the ache of old wounds, but they no longer hurt. They had become part of the landscape, like old roots under new grass. Ranger leaned against his leg. Caleb smiled faintly. "You did good, partner." Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang midnight. The future waited quietly, not in headlines or heroics, but in the small, steady act of keeping hope alive. And as snowflakes began to fall once more, gentle, fleeting, harmless, Maple Hollow slept beneath the watchful eyes of two guardians. One man, one dog, both finally home. Summer arrived early that year, painting Maple Hollow in colors so vivid it seemed like the town itself was breathing again. The hills were green, the rivers ran clear, and the sky above the Open Door Academy stretched wide and blue, unburdened by clouds. It had been 6 months since the school's reopening, and already it had become something of a legend, a place born from disgrace but reborn in grace. The townsfolk called it the Miracle School, where no child was ever turned away. Officer Caleb Rourke walked the edge of the playground with Ranger at his side, watching the children chase each other through sunlight. The German Shepherd had slowed over the past few weeks. His muzzle, once gold and black, was now almost silver. His steps carried the hesitation of age. Yet his eyes, those deep amber wells of loyalty, still followed Caleb's every move. The town kids adored him. Every morning, they left small gifts by his doghouse, scraps of ribbon, hand-drawn pictures, and occasionally a biscuit sneaked from home. Sarah Bennett emerged from the main building, holding a clipboard, her sun hat tilted at an angle that framed her face in gold. She was laughing, not the polite professional laugh she wore at board meetings, but a genuine, unguarded sound. Her life had changed too. Once a social worker scarred by disappointment, she now stood at the heart of the town's second chance, her kindness the quiet force keeping it together. Behind her walked Dr. Helen Stroud, a woman in her late 50s with sharp features softened by the years. She had recently joined the academy as its full-time counselor, a former child psychologist from Seattle who had retired early after losing her husband to cancer. She carried herself with calm precision, her gray hair tied neatly, her pale eyes observant but gentle. "The children are progressing faster than I expected," she said, her voice low and deliberate. "Especially the two sisters, Lila and Emma. They've made remarkable emotional recovery." Sarah nodded. "They've finally found a home." Dr. Stroud smiled faintly. "Sometimes healing doesn't need miracles, just consistency." Caleb approached them. "Everything all right?" "Better than all right," Sarah said. "We're planning something. Tomorrow's the 1-year anniversary since the school reopened." "Already?" Caleb asked, surprised. She nodded. "We thought of a memorial, something quiet but meaningful." Dr. Stroud added. "The children suggested planting trees, one for every student who joined this year. They also want to dedicate one to Ranger." Caleb looked down at his old partner. "He's still around to appreciate it," he said, smiling softly. "He's a symbol, Caleb," Sarah said, "for loyalty, for courage. He belongs to the story." That evening, after the last bell had rung and the laughter had faded, Caleb sat outside the academy porch, watching the sunset. Ranger lay beside him, head resting on his paws, breathing slow and steady. Across the yard, Lila and Emma were watering flowers, their small forms outlined against the orange sky. "You think we did it, boy?" Caleb murmured. "Made it right?" Ranger's tail thumped faintly in response. From the path, Ethan Marsh appeared, carrying a small paper bag. You talking to him again? He teased. Caleb chuckled. He gives better answers than most people. Ethan sat beside him, his coat unbuttoned, his face showing the kind of peace only time could earn. The committee approved your nomination, he said. Caleb frowned. Nomination for what? The state's Community Service Medal. You're officially a hero now. Caleb shook his head. Heroes don't file paperwork and feed stray dogs. Ethan smiled. Maybe that's what makes you one. They sat in silence for a while, the kind shared by men who no longer needed words. In the distance, the school bell rang once more, a reminder of schedules, of normalcy restored. The next morning dawned bright and windless. The entire town gathered in the academy courtyard. Banners of blue and white hung across the fence, and the children's art covered the walls. Handprints in paint, little messages scrawled in marker. Thank you for opening the door. At the center stood a wooden plaque carved by the town carpenter, Walter Dean, a quiet man in his 70s with steady hands and a weathered face. Walter was one of those who had once turned away the orphans at the old academy gate, ashamed now, but determined to make amends. It ain't much, he said, handing the plaque to Caleb, but it'll last longer than we will. The inscription read, "In memory of those who were left in the rain, and in honor of those who opened the door." The ceremony began with laughter and songs. Lila read another one of her poems, this time about new beginnings, and Emma stood beside her, clutching Ranger's leash proudly. The German shepherd stood tall, though his movements were slower. As the crowd applauded, he turned toward Caleb, his gaze calm and content, as if to say, "This is what we fought for." When the speeches ended, Sarah stepped forward with a small sapling. "This one's for him," she said softly, "for every good soul that stood guard when no one else would." The children gathered around, helping dig the soil. Caleb kneeled, pressing his hands into the earth beside them. Together, they lowered the tree, its thin roots spreading like threads of promise. Ranger lay nearby, watching, tail brushing the grass. As they finished, a hush settled over the courtyard. The sunlight slanted just right, illuminating the tree's leaves with a faint shimmer of gold. And in that stillness, Ranger exhaled slowly, eyes closing. He didn't stir again. Lila was the first to notice. "Mr. Caleb," she whispered. Caleb turned, his breath catching. The dog lay peacefully, as if merely resting. His fur glowed in the light, his body framed by the flowers the children had planted. Caleb reached out, his hand trembling as he stroked the familiar head. "Good boy," he whispered. "You did your job." The courtyard stayed silent. Even the wind held its breath. Sarah knelt beside him, tears glinting in her eyes. "He waited," she said softly, "until he saw it finished." That evening, after the crowd dispersed, Caleb remained by the tree. The children had placed small drawings beside the mound. One of them showed a dog with angel wings, standing guard by the school gate. A small wooden tag hung from a branch. Ranger's Tree. Sarah approached quietly, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "I thought you'd still be here." "I couldn't leave," Caleb said. "Feels like he's still watching." "He is," she said, "through everything this place stands for." They sat together, watching the fireflies drift through the dusk. The new sapling swayed gently in the evening breeze, its shadow long and slender across the ground. Ethan joined them later, his face solemn but calm. "You know," he said, "when I look at that tree, I don't see an ending. I see continuity. That dog saved more than 2 children that day. He saved an idea." Caleb nodded slowly. "Yeah, the idea that no one should ever be left outside in the rain again." Sarah smiled faintly. "And he's still standing guard over that promise." The 3 of them fell silent, the sound of cicadas rising softly around them. As the night deepened, the lights from the academy glowed warm and steady. Lila and Emma could be seen through the window, finishing their homework under Dr. Stroud's supervision. The town beyond was peaceful, reborn, alive. Caleb looked one last time at the tree, its leaves rustling faintly in the dark. Then he whispered, "Rest easy, Ranger. The door's still open." When the first light of dawn touched the schoolyard, the new leaves gleamed with dew. A bird landed on one of the branches and began to sing, a song so gentle it seemed to echo through the whole town. For those who listened, It sounded like memory, like loyalty, like love. It sounded like Ranger. In the quiet town of Maple Hollow, a man and his loyal dog reminded us that miracles are not always thunderous or bright. They often arrive softly, like a faithful companion beside us, or a door that opens just when all others have closed. It is through compassion, forgiveness, and courage that we witness the true hand of God at work. Every time we choose kindness over pride, mercy over judgment, or love over fear, we create a small miracle of our own. The same light that guided Caleb and Ranger still lives in each of us. It shines when we help a neighbor, comfort a child, or stand up for what is right even when no one is watching. May this story remind you that God's grace moves quietly but powerfully through ordinary people, turning sorrow into purpose and endings into beginnings. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below, tell us what part moved you most, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story of faith and redemption. May God bless you and your loved ones wherever you are. And if you believe that love still changes the world, type Amen in the comments to keep the light shining.